The streets of Manhattan shimmered beneath relentless rain, neon signs bleeding color into the puddles at Elena's feet. She clutched her briefcase tighter, her steps quickening as the city seemed to expand and empty out at once. Hunched under a lamplight, Elena Collins tried to steady her breath. Two figures cornered her, voices gruff, demanding her wallet. This was supposed to be her evening walk after another long court session, a moment to clear her mind from pages of testimony. A black sedan slid to the curb, its presence quiet but commanding. Vincent Romano stepped out, shoulders squared against the downpour, coat impeccably cut, gaze sharp. Without hesitation, he intercepted the confrontation. His words were firm but calm. "Enough. Go find somewhere dry." The muggers hesitated, eyes flickering with fear, and vanished into the alley. Only the rain remained, gentle and ceaseless. Elena took a shaky breath as Vincent turned to her. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern lining his features. She nodded, trying to mask the tremble in her voice. "Thank you, I wasn't expecting—" Vincent offered a handkerchief, almost shy. "It's not safe out here tonight. Can I offer a ride?" For a moment, Eleanor weighed trust against instinct. The city taught caution, but something in his demeanor felt more protective than threatening. She accepted, stepping into the warmth of the car. Vincent's driver, a silent man in his 40s, nodded politely, maneuvering through the mosaic of honking taxis and pedestrians. Elena watched Vincent in the dim light. His suit was expensive, his manner assured, but not arrogant. It was a fleeting kindness, unexpected from a stranger on Fifth Avenue. "You look like you've seen days worse than this," Vincent said, half smiling. "I'm a judge," Elena replied, her voice finally steady. "After today, I'm not sure New York's seen worse." Vincent's eyes flickered in recognition, but he said nothing. They drove in silence, city lights refracting through the glass. Eleanor felt a conflicting sense of relief. Tonight, she had been saved, but by someone whose past was clearly as shadowed as her own. He dropped her at the steps of her brownstone, leaving her with a simple benediction. "Take care out there. Not everyone in the city's so forgiving." She thanked him again, the gravity of the moment imprinting itself on her thoughts. Inside, Eleanor leaned against her door, heart pounding. Something told her this wouldn't be the last she'd see of the man in the rain. Manhattan's storm faded into a restless quiet outside as Eleanor replayed every detail. In a city built on secrets and power, her path had crossed with Vincent's for reasons neither of them understood. And all the while fate circled, waiting for its chance on the bench. The day after the incident felt unusually heavy. Morning sunlight forced its way into Elena's living room, but the night on the street lingered in her mind. She reviewed the details again as she sat at her kitchen table. Shadows behind the glass, the sound of rain, the steady calm of the stranger who had intervened. Her hands lingered on her mug of coffee. She searched local news sites for any report of the event, but found only another headline about rising city violence and the ongoing investigations into organized crime. The city was relentless, its problems woven into every block, every journey home. Vincent sat in his own world, a penthouse 30 stories up, with Central Park visible through tinted windows. He moved through his daily routine, giving orders by phone, but his mind returned to the woman on Fifth Avenue. He prided himself on reading people, but she had surprised him. Those eyes, defiant and vulnerable at once, and the unwavering way she had whispered no to her attackers. He asked his driver quietly if anyone recognized her, but the man shook his head. Some mysteries, Vincent decided, were best left alone. Work pulled Eleanor back into reality. The courthouse stairwells echoed with the shuffle of hundreds of lives seeking answers, justice, or at least a chance. There were files to review, cases to hear, decisions that weighed not just on statutes but on conscience. Yet in the gaps between hearings, her thoughts drifted. She wondered if the man from the rain went home to a family. Did he do this often, play hero in secret? Or was this just chance? That evening she dined alone at the diner near her apartment. Manhattan's noise faded inside the haze of blue booths and the quiet clink of coffee cups. She glanced up at a television in the corner. Another story about indictments, and a face flashed across the screen. It was him, Vincent Romano, identified in connection with racketeering investigations, but not yet charged. Her heart lurched. The man who had saved her was at the very center of the stories she spent her days adjudicating. The next week, a string of arrests shook the city's criminal underworld. Vincent maintained his cold composure, outwardly unshaken. Lawyers came and went from his office like chess pieces, but he felt the net tightening, a line being drawn between former alliances and new threats. In this pressure, memories of the judge in the rain unsettled him in ways he would not admit, even to himself. Elena, meanwhile, tried to convince herself that what had happened on the street could stay on the street. Yet when she received notification of her next assignment, a high-profile federal trial against organized crime, she froze. The defendant's name confirmed her fears. Vincent Romano. She breathed in deeply, steadying herself. The past and the present had collided with a force she could not have foreseen. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Across the city, a storm gathered again, promising new trials for both of them. The courthouse was a fortress against the chaos of Manhattan. Its marble columns, worn by generations seeking justice, echoed the footsteps of Elena Collins as she climbed the stairs before dawn. The morning air was heavy with autumn chill, and city workers rushed by in a blur of suits and coffee cups. Elena's mind was restless. Her assignment put her in the crosshairs of the press, the law, and her own past. Vincent Romano, the defendant, was now not just a story in her docket. He was the man who moments ago had existed only at the margin of her life, but had stepped into it with an act of unexpected mercy. She reviewed the files late into the previous night, piecing together the mosaic of accusations: racketeering, extortion, money laundering, acts orchestrated from the shadows. Prosecutors built a narrative of power, intricate webs of influence run through city contracts, silent partners, cash payments sifted through endless shell companies. Elena's temperament, molded by years of measured decisions, now had to confront the possibility that the stranger from Fifth Avenue was tied to the darker pulse of New York. Her chambers became a refuge and a prison, stacks of depositions flanking the desk lamp that burned through to dawn. News trucks staked out the sidewalk, the trial dubbed the indictment of the decade. While Eleanor tried to maintain judicial detachment, she couldn't erase the memory of Vincent's calm outside the rainstorm, the look that seemed to understand something unspoken in her. The first day of the trial brought Vincent face to face with the system. He entered in a navy suit, surrounded by high-powered attorneys and a press swarm groaning with flashbulbs. Elena's entrance was greeted by respectful silence, but every glance felt loaded, some with expectation, others suspicion, and a few subtle glimmers of dread. The prosecution delivered its opening. Vincent was painted as the architect of an empire built on violence and manipulation, a kingpin who controlled the city from the shadows. The defense countered with tales of entrepreneurship, community ties, and shadowy rivals eager to frame him. The gallery filled daily with journalists, off-duty cops, anxious families, and power brokers. Every person was there for a reason, and no one was truly neutral. Testimonies ranged from loyal former employees to frightened witnesses protected by anonymity. Some claimed Vincent had threatened them. Others painted him as a negotiator who kept order where the law had failed. Elena asked questions with a precision born of habit, but inside the lines blurred. Was the man before her capable of monstrous acts, or simply a survivor of a broken city? The city itself seemed to respond. Protests lined the blocks at lunch hour, marches for safety and criminal justice reform, chants that bled together under the courthouse windows. Elena watched from behind glass as the world debated not just Vincent Romano's innocence, but her own capacity for fairness. Each evening, Vincent reviewed the day with his lawyers, but in rare moments alone, he replayed the first night he met Elena. He wondered if he had ever actually helped anyone before, or if that act had been born of exhaustion, hope, or simply vanity. The trial did not let him rest. Family called, friends wept, and in quieter words, he urged his inner circle to hold firm. Pressure intensified when several witnesses received threats. Elena ordered protective measures. Her own security detail increased. But rumors circulated about leaks in law enforcement and the risk of corruption. She wrestled with anxiety, locking windows every night. Without intending, the trial became theater for the entire city, a reckoning not just for Vincent, but for New York itself. Halfway through cross-examinations, a key witness, a city contractor, vanished. The DA's office went into crisis mode, speculating about blackmail, hush money, or worse. Journalists clung to the story, fueling conspiracy theories that threatened Elena's reputation as much as Vincent's. One late night, Elena met privately with her mentor, Judge Haller, whose advice was concise. The law is impartial, but people rarely are. Do your duty, but remember, the city changes everyone it touches. Elena returned to her empty apartment, the street below pulsing with the siren song of civilization and crime. In the final stretch of the trial, Vincent took the stand. He spoke not as a criminal, but as a product of his neighborhood, defending his actions as survival. Elena listened, the echo of that rain-soaked night still in her mind. Could a single kind gesture redeem years of transgressions, or did fate require harsher, more finite resolutions? The last day in the courtroom, the air was electric. Prosecutors read out evidence one last time. Defense attorneys painted Vincent as a scapegoat chosen for political gain. Media outlets buzzed like insects at the windows. In the silence after closing arguments, Elena addressed the jury, her voice strong and unwavering, but her heart raw. Justice in Manhattan was never simple, and she felt the weight of imperfection heavier than ever. There were no heroes here, only people forced to make choices in the darkness, and hope that someday the city itself might forgive them. The city never truly slept, but in those pre-trial days, it seemed even Manhattan's neon pulses dulled under the weight of anticipation. As the trial entered its most volatile phase, both Elena Collins and Vincent Romano became magnets for currents that neither had the power to divert. Elena's world narrowed to a series of locked doors, whispered consultations, and the eternal, nervous presence of law clerks and security officers orbiting her like satellites. Every message, every phone call, sometimes just a wrong number, sometimes not, carried an edge of dread. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, had been invaded by the residual tension left by late-night phone calls and the growing stack of threats that she tucked away in a drawer, out of sight, but never out of mind. She tried to find solace in routines. Mornings began earlier and earlier, with her running shoes hitting the cold pavement of Central Park in the half-light, her mind reciting legal precedents in time with her footfalls. She drank her coffee slowly at a little corner bistro, the barista quietly loyal, never handing her a cup without a reassuring smile. But such moments could only stave off the growing sense of isolation. In court, she was the epitome of composure across the marble bench, but every day she felt the stress carve new lines at the corners of her eyes. Vincent's reality, meanwhile, was unraveling on a different axis. His high-rise fortress lost its sense of invincibility as federal agents stalked through it with subpoenas and search warrants. Associates who swore oaths of lifelong loyalty began to disappear, or worse, reappear on the prosecution's witness list. Vincent's lawyers became both confidants and interrogators. He alternated between stoic silence and controlled, private bursts of rage, never in public, but sometimes in the depths of night, fists pounding on mahogany desk, a silent scream he'd never let his men see. The organizational structure he built over decades was eroding. Money vanished through channels he once controlled. Contractors weighing their odds cut and ran. Old friends called cryptically to say goodbye, leaving Vincent to wonder if they would survive the week, or if their silence was a price paid to buy a few extra days of freedom. Complicating the personal drama was the public spectacle of the trial. Cable news found endless mileage in dissecting his every gesture, juxtaposing grainy surveillance stills with sanitized studio interviews of analysts and ex-cops. His past, both the vilified and the mundane, was fodder for pundits striving for outrage and ratings. Sometimes the narrative was cartoonish, painting him as some shadowy villain in a child's morality play. The reality was grayer, muddier, full of old deals struck under city streetlights and compromises made in rooms where trust was rationed out in thimblefuls. For Elena, the pressure began to seep into everything. Her clerks argued over the most sterile procedural points, nervous energy infecting even the moments between hearings. A younger colleague, Lisa, started checking in with her each night, not to talk of motions or verdicts, but because she understood instinctively that the loneliest place in New York was a judge's chambers after hours. This solidarity helped, briefly, yet Elena could not shake the sense that isolation was contagious. She read the threats again late one night, clipped sentences, lurking implications, warnings not to let sympathy cloud your judgment. Some letters came with headlines taped to them, stories about judges assassinated in other cities, or about scandals erupting from overlooked conflict of interest claims. Elena knew none of it would sway her, but even steel has a breaking point, and she wondered where hers was. The days in court lengthened, dragging with them the lives of jurors, witnesses, and the accused. Elena became a familiar, almost spectral presence to them, her expressions careful, her tone deliberate. She allowed no interruptions, except those strictly necessary to the legal process, and even then her rebukes were measured. Yet beneath her serenity, Elena fought the storm of second-guessing that trailed her everywhere. Had she made herself vulnerable? Did it matter that the defendant had once helped her? Would the legal establishment trust that her choice on the bench stemmed not from gratitude, but from the bedrock of law? The press, with its insatiable curiosity, began to circle closer. Paparazzi camped outside her building, journalists trailed her to and from the courthouse, and every friend risked being drawn into the wider narrative. Elena received cryptic notes in the mail. One simply read, "We see you." She kept each note in her growing file, wondering if obsession with documentation was protecting her or just feeding a cycle of anxiety she couldn't break. Vincent, meanwhile, grappled with other betrayals. One Wednesday, word reached him that Joey, the Hawk, an old ally, had flipped, agreeing to testify for the prosecution. Another, Fiona, a bookkeeper who'd handled untraceable cash for years, died under mysterious circumstances, the police calling it an overdose. Vincent knew New York, and New York knew what it would be called, but he couldn't escape the feeling that the wheel of fortune he'd once spun so masterfully was now grinding down everyone in its path, including people who had never asked to play. Nights stretched on, insomnia his uninvited companion. Sometimes he replayed the night on Fifth Avenue. Did his intervention save Elena, or simply place them in a new kind of jeopardy? Was the fate closing in on him, set when he built his empire, or in the instant when he offered a handkerchief to a trembling stranger? Guilt gnawed at him, not because of the crimes the world thought he'd committed, but for the world those crimes had created. A world where kindness seemed not just rare, but dangerous. As the city's autumn deepened, protesters gathered on the courthouse steps. Placards screamed for justice or denounced corruption. Elena would hear the chants as she arrived each morning, but long ago stopped trying to interpret them. Some supported her, others condemned the system, but she knew that no verdict would satisfy everyone, and she felt the futility of her role press against her like an icy wind. Inside the courtroom, the spectacle intensified. The prosecution shifted strategy, trying to build their final case not on headline-grabbing violence, but on a picture of systemic decay. Schools underfunded, neighborhoods neglected, all while organized crime profited. The defense, in contrast, highlighted Elena's supposed impartiality, gently questioning whether any judge could truly set aside her own humanity. On a particularly grey morning, one of Vincent's lawyers requested a sidebar, sliding a sealed envelope across the judge's bench. Elena opened it later, finding a collection of surveillance photos, her walking home, eating alone, shadows in her periphery. No note, but the message was clear. She was being watched not only by the media, but by forces inside the courthouse. Her hand trembled for a moment before she composed herself and continued. The trial went on. Witnesses delivered testimony in flat, tense voices, some appearing in bulletproof vests, others glancing nervously at the public benches. Elena recorded each objection, overruled or sustained, in careful handwriting that to her had become an act of control, a way to impose order on a world disintegrating fast. In the evenings, Vincent received legal news from his lawyer's lips. The prosecution's case was faltering in places, but still lethal. A surprise witness might appear, but no one could say who. Rumors were worse than certainty, and paranoia crept into his judgment calls. Every trusted associate was now a possible traitor. He wondered often what Elena thought about all this. Did she wish he'd kept driving that night? Did she hate him, pity him, or see only the mask he wore for the world? Elena tried breathing exercises, therapy, late-night walks, even sketching the city to calm her nerves, but nothing lasted. The pressure mounted, forming a shell around her. She became afraid that if she ever spoke honestly, to the press, to her friends, to her own reflection in the mirror, the integrity she'd worked her entire life to build might simply implode. Still, she pressed on. Weeks blurred into one another. The only constant was change, new evidence, new threats, new strategies, new doubts. She found herself drifting at times, the difference between a dream and waking less clear with each passing day. At night, Elena sometimes imagined herself on the witness stand, her life, her motives, her heart, all subject to interrogation. With the closing arguments looming, the city twisted with anticipation. Lawyers rehearsed for hours, calling in consultants, analysts, even retired FBI agents to craft the perfect statements. Elena reviewed every page of notes, every recorded transcript, every piece of evidence. She read the legal opinions of past cases, hoping for guidance but finding only reminders that no situation was ever exactly the same as the one before her. Her phone buzzed at midnight one Wednesday, an anonymous tip warning her to recuse herself, threat thinly veiled as advice. She stared at the screen, torn between anger at anonymous cowardice and fear that maybe, just maybe, all this attention was deserved. She told no one, logging the call for security, then deleting the record. The city pressed closer, the noise nearer. Vincent prepared for the verdict with a clarity he had not felt since building his first business. He knew, in the silent depths of his conscience, that he had made the choices that led here. Yet he felt a perverse gratitude for that night in the rain, brief, liminal, unreal in its possibility. For years he had wondered if it was possible to do the right thing, even once, and escape the shadows of old choices. Now, as the walls closed in, he realized that acts of kindness might haunt a man more than violence ever could. The evening before the verdict, both Elena and Vincent found themselves alone, looking out over the same city. He from his holding cell, she from the solitude of her office window, each tracing the lines of streetlights as if searching for answers in the geometry of New York's grid. They did not speak and might never again, but were bound by a private history no one else would ever fully understand. The city rumbled below, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that the course of two lives and the fragile hope of justice would soon be decided in a room lit not by sunlight, but by the flicker of hope and fear that remains when all other lights have gone out. The city had come alive with cold winds and steel-grey skies as the final day of Vincent Romano's trial dawned on Manhattan. New York, behind its cab windows, its coffee carts, its stained-glass storefronts, seemed to pause to see what would come. News crews circled the courthouse, anchoring themselves to metal barricades, determined to catch a fragment, a gesture, a word, an expression, before the doors closed on the last phase. For weeks, the city's morning radio talk shows debated justice, corruption, power, and grace, always returning to the story of the elusive mafia boss and the judge whose life he had once, however briefly, touched. Inside her office, Elena Collins closed the window and tried to steady her breathing. Her robes hung on the back of the chair, the ceremonial black weight she would soon slip over her frame, a barrier, she hoped, between the aching, uncertain woman at the desk and the authority she needed to project at the bench. Her clerk, Lisa, set down a cup of coffee and offered a wordless look of encouragement before moving to answer the relentless phone. Down the hall, the jury foreman's quiet voice echoed as he reviewed the final instructions, the words that would follow the jurors into their sequestered deliberation room. Elena paused at the mirror in the bathroom, hands pressed to cold porcelain, staring at the furrows of worry etched into her brow. Every nightmare, every sleepless night, every moment replayed from the weeks prior. Witness threats, late-night knocks, memories of rain, and the suffocating gaze of cameras played across her face in sharp relief. No one prepares for the moment when the law must be more than a rule-book, when it must be lived, felt, and shouldered like a burden that can never be left behind. In the main hall, Vincent Romano waited on a wooden bench, wrists resting on his knees, eyes obscured by the shadow of a brow that, despite rumors, despite legends, now belonged to a tired man. His lawyer, DeSantis, whispered tactics, but the noise faded into the drone of anticipation. Vincent's thoughts spun in tight orbits. The face of his missing associate, his daughter's last hurried call from college, the old woman in Queens who used to bake bread for his men, the rain and the judge and the knowledge that, whatever the verdict, there could be no more denial of consequence. The press immortalized even the smallest gesture. When Vincent's lawyer offered him water, the click of camera shutters filled the air. Each flash preserved his expression, resigned, wary, perhaps even relieved, though he would not name it relief. As the jury filed back in, silence settled over the courtroom. Elena sat at the bench, the weight of 15 years of judicial service suddenly insufficient preparation. The gallery, bristling with anticipation, family members, reporters, survivors, and a handful of faceless men who had trailed this story from its very beginnings, seemed to hold its collective breath. The foreperson stood, a slip of paper trembling in hand, and read the verdict. Guilty. A sound, neither sob nor murmur, passed through the room. Vincent's eyes closed. He remained still, a monument to the city's contradictions, generosity and brutality, loyalty and betrayal, the myth and the mortal exposed together under fluorescent lights. Elena thanked the jury, then delivered the sentence. Her voice, measured but solemn, spoke not only to the crime, but to the legacy left by choices made in silence, in desperation, in attempts to bridge chasms between justice and survival. To those who expected vengeance, she offered only process. To those who expected exoneration, only truth. The defendant's rights, the crime's horror, the family's grief. All she could do was bear witness and hope the balance she struck resembled something of justice. When it ended, the noise returned. Reporters crammed the corridor. Family members wept or hugged or watched, hollow-eyed, as Vincent was led away in cuffs. Elena returned to her chambers alone. She locked the door, sat by the window, and allowed the weight of the moment to settle over her shoulders, heavier than any robe or title. Yet even as the world rushed to package the trial into headlines for the evening news, Elena wondered what would remain when the city moved on. She opened her laptop and drafted her statement for the press. She wrote not as a symbol, but as a woman, a worker in service of an idea larger than any one person. She spoke of law and empathy. She spoke of risk and the necessity of community. She alluded, but did not disclose, that everyone in the city, criminal, judge, bystander, could one day collide at the intersection of fate and compassion. In another cell, in another part of the city, Vincent sat on a narrow mattress and stared at the cement wall. The noises of the jail, the calls, the cries, the distant slamming doors faded as he remembered the light through the rain on Fifth Avenue, and the way a stranger's courage had changed the arc of both their lives. He thought of his daughter, of debts that could never now be repaid, and of the city's endless tide of new stories washing over the marks his own would leave. Days passed. Appeals were filed. The world kept moving. New Yorkers argued on subway platforms. Teachers picked up chalk. Old men debated politics over chess in the park. Elena presided over new cases, assault, eviction, questions of money and survival, while learning to trust her own instincts again, slowly, chapter by chapter. Vincent built a reputation in prison as a man who listened more than he spoke. He ran a book club, gave advice to the younger men, remembered to call his daughter. Sometimes his name was invoked in the news, as warning or myth, never as a man merely trying to understand what he had done. Eventually, Elena and Vincent would cross paths again. A prison literacy program, a letter requesting an appeal, a chance encounter in the corridor. The city provides such moments endlessly, without warning. Their interaction would be cool, professional, but both would remember what it meant to see the world briefly through another's eyes. Each, scarred in their way, would learn once more that justice, like forgiveness, comes not as a wave, but as rain, insistent, patient, falling on every life in the city, without discrimination, seeking only what roots might take hold. The city was unchanged on the surface, steel, glass, noise, but beneath every verdict, every act of mercy or anger, lay the memory of two lives that met in darkness and left each other against every improbability, changed forever by the simple courage to reach out, if only for a moment.